Welcome back, everyone. Dr. Scott Gerber is back with us today. He is an ONU Law Professor. We're talking a little bit about the Second Amendment, and also President Biden's made no bones about the fact that he would like to ban assault weapons, especially in the light of several recent mass shootings. Now, the president, as you noted in one of your op-eds, came out and said that the Second Amendment is not absolute. And in your op-ed, you gave your thoughts on that. Tell us what those were.
Yeah, I'm a libertarian, so I believe in fewer laws. So I'm pro-rights. I believe the Second Amendment is an individual right. So I think the Supreme Court interpreted that correctly in 2008. But no right is absolute, none. And in the Heller case that Justice Scalia wrote in 2008, and he was very conservative, he said that as well. So no right, free speech. You can say lots of things, but there are some restrictions, and the same would apply to every right, including the right to own guns.
How far then? Now, the president, as we mentioned at the outset, said that he would like to ban assault weapons. Does that, when we say that the Second Amendment is not absolute, does that apply to that? Do you see that if he were to get that through, which I doubt, if he were to get that through, does that seem legally okay?
For me, it would be constitutional. And again, in the Heller case, even Justice Scalia intimated that that would be okay because assault weapons weren't weapons in common usage. That was the phrase at the time. And so, yeah, that would seem obvious that that would be okay. But the NRA is lobbying hard against it. And as you pointed out, they've persuaded enough Republicans to vote against almost any gun regulation, including that one. But if I was on the Supreme Court, I would vote to uphold that law.
Something you wrote in the op-ed took me back to high school, maybe college. This idea the Second Amendment is devoid of no law language. And I remember we had a prof who talked about that, and that was actually on a test, which amendments had that in. If that phrase, no law shall, was included in the Second Amendment, does that make a difference, or is that too far?
I don't think it would make a difference. The First Amendment does contain that language. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. But only two justices in the history of the court ever thought no law meant no law. And so, for example, if I think President Biden is doing a poor job, I can say that. But I can't walk into the White House bedroom at 3 a.m. and scream that at him because he has a right to sleep and to be safe. So I don't think that would stop a reasonable regulation.
What do you think? You mentioned the relationship that a lot of politicians, both Democrat and Republican, have with the NRA and the money they get from them for campaigns and that kind of thing. And maybe this is a dumb question, but if you went back to the founding fathers who probably never could have even thought of that, what do you think they would think about the fact that people who are making laws are receiving millions and millions of campaign contributions from an organization that's clearly promoting these kind of things for guns?
They would not like it. And one of the most famous of the Federalist Papers, Federalist Number 10, written by James Madison, warned against the vice of, quote, factions, which is interest group influence on policymaking. And so he opposed it. We created an extended republic rather than a small republic to try to minimize that. But it's still there. Obviously, the NRA is a very effective lobbying group, but I don't think the framers would have appreciated how much influence the NRA has on gun safety laws.
Do you think the framers, this becomes the debate, what did the framers think? What were they thinking when they wrote the Second Amendment, the First Amendment? Do you think they gave enough forethought to say, hey, things are going to change that we can't even fathom now, especially when it comes to guns and semi-automatics and that? They didn't have the specifics, but they knew things would change when it came to those. Do you think they had the forethought to put in the flexibility in the Constitution to say, hey, there will be changes that we're not even thinking about now?
Absolutely. And John Marshall, in the most famous Supreme Court decision ever written, Marbury v. Madison, made that point by saying we must remember that it's a constitution that we're interpreting, intended to endure for the ages to come. And so, yes, so they framed their provisions in general language, principles. So, yeah, I think they realized that things need to evolve. You have to be consistent with the principle. So the principle that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to bear arms. We can't ignore that, but that doesn't mean that you can own a nuclear weapon, for example.
Yeah, it's a good point. They would have never thought of that. Where can we see the op-ed? The op-ed's a great read. Where can we find that?
Well, that one was written after the Uvalde massacre in Texas, so that was in the New York Post.
Yeah.
And then I wrote another one this semester about the Bruin Second Amendment case that Justice Thomas wrote at the end of the last term. That was in the Hill. So I've written a couple pieces on this.
All right, great reads. Thank you, Dr. Gerber. We appreciate it as always.
You're welcome, Jeff.
You bet. Nice chatting with you. We'll be back right after this.